So my name is Emmanuelle Labo. I'm the director of the Aston Center for Applied Linguistics that plays host for all the activities of the Aston Interpreter Network. We aim to have a meeting either online, hybrid like today, and basically we're trying to serve the interpreting communities by coming with hopefully some interesting topics that are part of your daily practice as interpreters. And we're very open to your suggestions as well. So we have at the end of each event a feedback survey in which you are very welcome to basically tell us what you would like us to organize event on. So yeah, that's us. And today we've got a fully hybrid event because not only we've got people taking part online and in the room, but we have also some of our speakers online because unfortunately Robin, who was supposed to be with us, has gone down with COVID at the beginning of the week, so we don't want to be sick, so we're very happy to have him, but not too close. So another one bites the dust. He had managed to avoid COVID for 3 years, I'm told, but you know, in the end, COVID won. So COVID won, Robin 0. So today we've got an event that is a bit like a conversation, really, because we have 3 very experienced public service interpreters and also business interpreters, because they have a practice in both settings, and they will be sharing with us their experience. So Rekha Narula, who is running the series on our behalf, will be leading the conversation, and I guess that's all I've got to say. What Rekha, Ken, and Robin have to say will be far more interesting. So I see you at the end.
Thank you very much, Emmanuelle. Thank you to everybody who's attended in person and online, including from quite far away, the Basque country, as I know at least one person is attending from there. As Emmanuelle said, my name is Rekha Narula, and I am a business conference and public service interpreter. I've been doing interpreting for 20 plus years, and I have an undergraduate degree and postgraduate qualifications, including the DPSI in 2 options, that is the Diploma in Public Service Interpreting in 2 options, health and law. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our 2 guests this evening, Roblin Humphrey and Ken Paver. So just a little bit about Roblin and then a little bit about Ken. Roblin started learning languages, specifically French, at a very young age, and from that time he knew that he wanted to be a translator or an interpreter, and that's what he's been doing now for quite some time. He's got an undergraduate qualification in languages and a master's, a postgraduate in translation studies. He spent about half of the 1990s living and working in France. Since 2002, Roblin has been working as a home office, that is to say, mainly immigration interpreter, and has worked with them on a freelance basis, mainly on asylum cases. He also works in the private sector, where he does simultaneous interpreting at conferences and chuchotage, or whispered interpreting, during business meetings. And finally, he also does excuse me, translation work, focusing on legal and financial texts. Our next guest, who's sitting here to my right, Ken Paver. Say hello, Ken.
Hello.
Thank you. So Ken is an interpreter and translator, you'll be happy to learn. Originally from Liverpool and now based in the West Midlands, Ken has had more than 30 years experience as an interpreter, a translator, a trainer, a lecturer, and copywriter. He works mainly in the nuclear and technology sectors. He translates from French, German, and Dutch into English, and he interprets between English and French. He has a degree in modern languages from Oxford University and a postgraduate qualification in translating and interpreting from the University of Kent. Previously, Ken has lectured on undergraduate and postgraduate translation study programs at Aston University, and he is also a former member of the Council of the Chartered Institute of Linguists and of the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, the ITI board. So that's a little bit about Roblin, a little bit about Ken, and now we can begin properly. So first of all, I'm going to be asking Roblin about how did you get into this field, Roblin, into the market as such?
Well, in the introduction gave about, sorry,
it's kind of breaking up a little bit, Roblin.
Okay. Wave your hand.
We can hear you now.
In the introduction gave me, there was a little mention about when I started learning French. I always knew to work translator. So as years go by, so you leave school to get jobs. This goal of interpreter translation is getting further.
Robin, sorry to cut you off.
I was using my language, but using it, and it was very discouraging.
Robin, just 1 second. We can't. It's breaking up. I wonder. Unfortunately, I wonder if you might switch off your camera, because sometimes that does help.
Yeah.
And also, if people can turn off their mics. Yeah, not your microphone, Robin. Your camera. Right. So let's try it this way.
Try turning off your mouse from where you maybe it's picking up the echo from the room.
I'm using my headset. It's going to make a difference to the audio. You just carry on amongst yourselves whilst I try to make sure that my headset is the input for my audio. Okay, you should be able to hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, much better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. I just need to change my output device so I can hear you. Cool. Say something, please, Reka. Can't hear a word you're saying. Emmanuel is muted.
So the question was, how did you get into being an interpreter and translator?
I must say, this is a lesson for next time, because audio is a lot better now. Basically, what I was saying was, I went through years of saying to myself, I'm good enough to do this, and just not finding the breaks. It took going to work in France for the majority of my 20s, coming back, doing an undergraduate degree, knowing even more when I came back that my French was excellent, although I say it myself. That's what I was told. So I thought, well, look, why waste your time in jobs that you don't like? The sad reality was an economic one. I needed to earn money. I needed to keep working. I didn't want a gap in my CV because it would be more difficult to get jobs. So I ended up back in that cycle of jobs where employers said, yeah, you'll use your languages. You will. And then I didn't. So cut a long story short, it came to about 2015. I was made redundant from a job where I was using my French language skills a lot, but for economic reasons. the business had to let me go. They're a small manufacturing business. And I said at that point, I'm never going to work for anybody else again. I just don't want to go through this job change. So I'd already been doing a little bit of translation here and there. I put out a few more feelers, and certain people that I know would send me translations because they were booked or they weren't available. And it just all sort of stemmed from there. Same with interpreting as well. Although the interpreting is slightly different in that when I was finishing at Salford University in 2001, there was a chap in the library who I knew as a fellow student. And it was just that sort of time where there weren't that many people left going into the library every day. And he said, so what are you doing once you've graduated? So, well, I don't know. I'll go back home, I suppose, and have the summer off. And I didn't really have any plans. He said, call this number. It's from the Home Office interpreting unit. So I did. And I did a few assessments for them. That was quite amusing because the young ladies who were sent along to assess my French said that I should have their job because my French was a lot better than theirs. And I've been doing Home Office interpreting jobs ever since. I don't do an awful lot of them because French is a fairly common language, let's say, and there are a lot of French to English interpreters, and there's not a huge demand for French interpreters in an asylum system compared with other languages. There is a demand, but not a huge demand. Having said that, just to finish off, I did a 5-hour interview just today.
Right. Well done. Well done for persevering. Thank you, Robin. I'm now going to ask Ken the same question. How did you come into the field of interpreting and translation?
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I suspect my answer is going to be a lot more, I want to say conventional. Maybe that's not the right word than Robin's. I came in via the traditional route of doing a languages degree, doing a postgraduate course in translation and interpreting. And then I got a job in-house as a translator and interpreter with a company in industry, where I was required to do, I'm a business interpreter, I was required to do interpreting for that business mainly on site. So that was my way in, and after a few years in that company, I then became freelance and obviously took my contacts from that initial company with me and also worked in the same business and related businesses. So it was, as I say, that was the kind of a relatively conventional route into interpreting. There is a much longer answer, of course, which where if one needs to get into the business interpreting market, then one needs all of the kind of things that Robin's talked about, the kind of capabilities and the interest in the languages and so on. But obviously those things kind of go without saying if you're doing a languages degree and if you're doing an interpreting postgrad, all of those things are fed into that. So that was my way into business interpreting, and I've been doing it along with translation ever since.
Thank you, Ken. Robin, back to you now. In what kind of settings do you interpret? I know you've said home office and you did a 5-hour sort of semi-marathon today. What kind of other settings do you interpret in?
Well, within the Home Office is, of course, at the moment, their emphasis is on doing meetings online. But in the past, I would have been in whatever premises they asked me to go to, mainly a place in Solihull, where they carry out a lot of the interviews for the Midlands region in England. So that would have been actually face-to-face in an interview room with an immigration officer and a claimant. Other settings for interpreting have been a factory shop floor, which is extremely challenging because the people or the factory owners, let's say, showing their guests or their visitors around, thought it would be interesting to show everybody around without stopping the actual manufacture and the noise. So as you're interpreting, you can hear what the person is saying next to you, but you're not sure really that anybody else can because the place is so noisy.
And as a public service interpreter, apart from Home Office, what other settings have you worked in, Roblin, as a public service interpreter?
Well, you raise an interesting point because I'm on a list or a panel list for Home Office interpreters. I don't hold registration as an NRPSI interpreter, so therefore I'm not called by the police or by the courts services. If I were to be called by the courts, I'd want to know how they got my number because my number's not on their list or any list for the courts. I have had telephone calls from the police before who
Yes.
have asked me to help them with interviews.
But you have attended police stations, haven't you?
I have attended police stations, yes.
But for a very specific type of work?
Well, they've always been immigration related. Without giving too much away, the one that stands in memory is at Smethwick police station. A gentleman had been arrested for a certain misdemeanor, and he had taken the opportunity to claim asylum.
Right.
And one of the questions I had to ask him was, "You've been in the country for 6 years. Why have you only just thought of seeking asylum now?"
Okay.
That sort of thing. I have also been asked for assistance by another branch of the Home Office called Immigration Police or Immigration Enforcement. And they look specifically at perhaps crimes that are in the process or are being committed whilst people are perhaps waiting for their cases to be heard or waiting for various results. And the bulk of the work that I've done with that particular group is actually translation of French court documents.
All right, I'll ask Ken the same question. Ken, how did you, and what kind of different settings do you interpret as a business in the private sector?
Yeah, thanks. Most of my work with industry tends to be on-site. On-site doesn't necessarily mean that it is on the factory floor. On-site can also be in offices and meeting rooms. So typically interviews with management, interviews with plant personnel. However, it also does include lots of work on the factory floor. Lots of work out of doors as well, externally, so around the sites in the open air. Lots of work inside fairly noisy facilities. Also, because of the specific area I work in, nuclear power a lot of the time, I work in the nuclear industry all the time. We also often work inside the radiation controlled area. So all of those settings we'll talk about the challenges shortly, I think, but all of those settings have different challenges. So there's a very wide variety from, as I say, the management interviews in the offices, all the way through to interviews with the personnel, observations on the factory floor, where they're observing maintenance tasks, observing operations tasks in the control room, right through to working inside the radiation controlled area, so quite a wide range.
Robin, do you need any specific qualifications to do the public service work that you do specifically for Home Office?
That's a very good question. I'll give you an honest answer. I don't know at the moment if, when taking on new French language interpreters, the Home Office wants specific qualifications, because I joined the list in 2002 and I went to them with a degree in French and previous qualifications in French and a CV full of life of work in France. And they clearly took that as my qualification. What they look for these days, I'm not sure, but yes, they should indeed seek qualification evidence of good qualifications from an interpreter, for sure.
I'll ask Ken the same question. In your line of business / private sector work, do you need any specific qualifications? And I know you mentioned about working at power plants, going into the RCA, the radiologically controlled area. So do you need any specific kind of qualifications or diplomas or certification?
Thanks, Reka. From a language and interpreting point of view, no. Obviously, we're subject to quality requirements with relation to the language service provider that hires us for this work on site, but there are no specific quality language qualification requirements. However, we do have to go through safety induction to go onto the site, and then for those of us who are qualified to go into the radiation area, we do have a special qualification which requires us to do some initial training and then refresher training every couple of years. And we also have a medical exam that goes with it so that we can work as an interpreter inside the radiation area. So from a language point of view, no, apart from the quality requirements, of course, of being an interpreter, there are no specific qualifications. But from a kind of industrial safety and radiation protection point of view, yes.
Thank you both. And now, having talked about the sectors, the settings in which you interpret, one is more public service, one is more business and private sector. What are the associated challenges? So for you, coming to you, Robin, what are the associated challenges of working as a public service interpreter?
Well, one of the challenges was highlighted actually today in an interview that I did, or that I interpreted for, and the claimant was from an African nation, French speaking, with a very strong accent. There are so many different things that can arise just in the nature of questions that are put to a claimant. For example, what was your address? Well, the concept of an address does not exist, perhaps, where this person comes from. One of the particular difficulties that arose this afternoon was that, by his own admission, this claimant was not very well educated, and the French that he spoke was clearly not the sort of French that I speak. In that I speak metropolitan French from France. I do believe that I'm good enough to be able to converse with people from Africa. In fact, I have done countless times. But this particular claimant, he did say he wasn't very well educated. He'd never been to school. He was well over 18 years old, and the accent that he had made it very difficult to understand what he was saying. One of the other challenges that I'll touch on very briefly is that when an immigration officer asks a question, I believe, and it's not me making a judgment, I believe that they ask them in such a way as to try and elicit as much information as they can for the claimant to go forward to that particular claim, so that the Home Office has enough information or adequate information to make a fair decision on an asylum claim. But sometimes the claimant or the respondent seems very reluctant to give a direct answer to a very simple question, and that's one of the challenges, is that you come across people who, for whatever reason, are claiming asylum, and they want to perhaps portray or create a certain story or narrative in the eyes of the immigration officer.
Thanks,
so it leads to frustration when I just sometimes sit there in despair and think, just answer the question. Just answer the question. But I can't say anything about that. I have to keep quiet.
Thanks, Robin. And now to you, Ken, what are your challenges as a business and private sector?
Thanks. Obviously, working on site in a business environment, there are four types of challenges, I think. First of all, the environment, that's the one that obviously springs to mind immediately. The environment in terms of safety for interpreters, that's one of my interests, really, safety for interpreters working on industrial sites. So obviously industrial safety, you have to wear personal protective equipment and so on. There are things like noise. You have to work out how to position yourself so you can see the person's lips, and if to do that you have to put yourself in an unsafe position, then you have to ask, look, I can't interpret safely here, etc. So there are those things. Obviously, we're also working in a nuclear plant. There is radiation safety to take into account, so you have to be careful about. As part of the training, we do understand how to protect ourselves. So that's the first lot. Secondly, obviously the technical terminology. In business, you can get a wide range, and it's not always just technical, because organizational technology can be a real killer. Administrative technology, not just the technical terminology. The third type of challenge is understanding not the technical terminology, but understanding the technology. So if you're interpreting something relating to some kind of machine, you may have the terminology at your fingertips, but if you don't know how the machine works, often you'll come across it even if you have the terminology. So there's the two layers, there's the terminology and the technology understanding. The last one, the fourth one quickly, is what we would call in French the enjeu. What are the stakes? What's important? Now I know for business, for public service interpreters, we have things like immigration status. For people who are in front of the police, there are lots of issues which put pressure on people. And in business interpreting, you have different kinds of pressures. The outcome, maybe a business outcome, which feels a lot less, possibly a lot less important than a kind of life or death issue, or an issue about going into prison or not going into prison, or getting into the country and seeking asylum, or being granted asylum or not. However, in my line of work, we also have the challenge of nuclear safety, which is very important as well. So in business interpreting, often we might feel that we don't have the same pressures on the participants in the meeting, on our clients, but safety and nuclear safety do create a big kind of additional pressure when you're working on nuclear sites.
Thanks, Ken. Now the final question to both of you, and I'll start with you, Robin, first. And if you can just both give a very kind of brief answer. What are the tools that you use to meet the challenges? And how did you acquire those tools? Because, for example, Robin, I'm sort of going to put you on the spot. You mentioned that an applicant or a claimant might not always give a direct answer, might have their own agenda of how and why they're claiming asylum. You are frustrated from your point of view as an interpreter, and if they're not giving a straight answer to a basic or simple question. What kind of tools have you acquired, and how did you acquire them?
Family and friends would say about me that I'm perhaps a person who can lose his temper very easily, whereas I disagree. I have extreme levels of patience, and that is demonstrated in the many interviews that I've done. I just cannot allow myself to sit there and show my frustration in these sort of situations. So I'm not sure if I can come up with an example like that straight off the top of my head, but if this afternoon, for example, I repeated the question to the applicant 3 times, and I listened to his answer 3 times, and it was not an answer to that question. So in that little interaction, I did not tell the immigration officer, I'm repeating the question, I'm repeating the question. I waited until I'd done it 3 times, and then I broke out of the interpreting mode and a direct speech and said, immigration officer, the applicant has not answered the question in the way that I believe you want it answered. Would you like to reformulate the question? And so he did, and then we got an answer. That does take it out of you. And as I finished that interview session this afternoon and thought, oh, I've got a little bit of time to rest and get a cup of tea before I meet Reka and Ken at Aston Interpreting Network online, I thought, how did 4.5, 5 hours just pass me by just like that? It went so quickly, you don't notice the time. So there's the resilience you need to develop as well, which I have done just by being put in the situation. You need to develop an awareness of what is called vicarious trauma. that is trauma experienced because of the interpreting that I'm doing for the person. Now, I must say the vast majority of the claimants that I've interpreted for have been male. And I'll leave it to your imagination as to some of the harrowing stories that some of the female applicants have recounted from various places in the world. It did happen once where I suggested to the immigration officer, I think we should stop. And I don't.
Why, Robin?
Well, because the applicant was clearly unable to talk. She was in tears. She was very, very distressed. She was more than in tears. She was just completely breaking down because she was being asked to recount circumstances which led to her arrival in the UK. You mentioned tools, a pen and paper. It seems obvious, but if you turn up to a Home Office interview without a pen and paper, you're going to be asking somebody, have you got a pen and paper? Because you need it. You need to be polite, but robust in the way that you ask things. Not all immigration officers are the same in terms of their levels of experience. I'm not saying that they're inexperienced, but some are clearly vastly more experienced than others, and they will ask really, really long questions, which doesn't make the interpreting task easy.
Thank you, Robin. Over to you, Ken. Same question. What tools and how did you acquire them?
Thanks. I do like to think in terms of toolboxes for interpreters and for translators. One of the best comments about toolboxes I ever had was from a Finnish academic who told me that translation and interpreting theory is about practicing translating interpreters with toolboxes, which is a really good point. So toolboxes are the kind of things we need. So if I'm on site and we're talking about safety, as I said just a second ago, if I am in an unsafe position, that I need to have a tool in my toolbox where I go and I say to the client, I'm in an unsafe position here, and then you need to make a suggestion. You must be able to have those things at your disposal when you're working on site in a business situation. So if we go through the challenges again in order, the safety challenges, you need to have a toolbox where you know what the rules are, you know what is safe to do. For example, not taking your hearing protection off if you're in a noisy area. It's unsafe to do that even for a short time, because if you do it 100 times over your career, then you will have impaired your hearing. For example, you need to know not to do that. All of those. The awareness of safety and the knowledge that when you can of how to challenge a safety and unsafe condition, all of those things should be in your safety toolbox. And in your terminology toolbox, you need to be able to know what to do if you don't know a term. If you hear an unfamiliar term, all of those kind of things should be in your toolbox. You should be able to go, okay, I don't know that term. What am I going to do? What's my tactic? What's my strategy? It's easier for translators because they're offline, they're in non-real time. But for an interpreter, you need to know what to do. You need to know what the tools are. So you need to be able to say, okay, stop, I don't know what that means. Can you explain? Obviously, if you're in a simultaneous situation, that's impossible. And we do occasionally work in simultaneous situations on site, but we're mainly doing consecutive or liaison. So again, toolboxes you need to have, the tools you need to have that at your fingertips so that you can raise an issue, resolve it with the client, and move on. Otherwise, if you continue interpreting where you don't know any of the terms, then you're going to really struggle. The terminology issue, the technology, if you don't understand the technology, it's much more difficult. But again, you need to have in your toolbox the ability to say, okay, I'm not sure what this is happening. I don't know what's going on here. And obviously, I have been in a situation where I had to do that. Can you explain this briefly? Over the years, obviously, that happens less and less. The toolbox there is also about preparation, as is the terminology toolbox, obviously. So the tools you need for terminology and technology understanding, a lot of that is about preparation, learning, sharing beforehand, always asking questions, always learning. An interpreter who tells you that they don't need to learn anymore is a fool. The last one about enjeu, the challenge about enjeu, the importance, the stakes, if you like. The main thing there is awareness. Your interpreter training should kick in, so you should be aware of what you should do and what you shouldn't do in any kind of business situation, any kind of Same applies to PSI, obviously, but in a business situation, you should know what you should do and what you shouldn't do as an interpreter. And if you're aware of the stakes, if it's about nuclear safety, if it's about a business signing a big contract and so on, you just need to be aware of those. So those are, as I say, I like to think in terms of toolboxes, tools and toolboxes, a set of tools for a given type of situation or for a given topic.
Right. Thank you very much, both of you, Ken, especially just now, and to Roblin. Thank you for your generous input, for coming along in person and online, and for the information, the very insightful information you have shared with us today. And now, since we have about 20 minutes left, I'll open the floor to any questions, either in the room here or in the chat box, or on, if you raise your hand, Roblin and or Ken can answer, or both, but not at the same time. Yes.
For Ken,
Yes.
but how you managed to get into nuclear?
Yes, I saw that, and I was going to ask him. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Thank you. So the question, yes, how did I manage to get into nuclear work? Thanks for the question. The answer is that my first job was in-house with a nuclear company. So when I had completed my translation and interpreting postgrad, I applied for and got a job with a company in the northwest of England, which operated what we call the fuel cycle facilities, so that covering the whole nuclear fuel cycle, which is a really interesting opportunity because it enabled me to use my French, German and Dutch, which are my 3 languages for translation. It also enabled me to do French and German interpreting. I did German interpreting at the time. I don't do that anymore. So that was my way in. And then after I'd been there for a few years, then I became freelance and I carried on focusing on nuclear as my main area of specialism.
Thank you, Ken. Any other questions? Thanks, Ken. Anyone in the room? Sue, yes, if you can put your hands up, then we can see. So Sue and then Charity.
Need to unmute Sue.
Sue needs to, I need to unmute Sue.
No, she's done it herself. She's done it herself, that's fine.
Yeah.
With on tech. Thank you very much both for your talks. I'd be really interested to know, Ken, if you could give us some pointers in terms of which agencies we can contact for interpreting work with nuclear power stations and so on.
Thank you, Sue. Hi. Good question. A difficult one to answer, really. There are several agencies in the UK who handle nuclear stuff, but there's such a large number. It's very difficult to point you in the direction of one in particular. I don't do, most of my work is actually for companies in France and Belgium. And again, it's very difficult to give you any pointers specifically to which agencies because there are so many.
Just one would do, or two. And my language, as you know, is French, so that would be quite useful to know which ones deal with French, if you're able to give us a bit of help here.
Yeah, difficult. What do you think, Reka?
I don't know any in the UK.
Okay, no, but yeah, no, okay.
Without sounding like we're talking, we're closing ranks, as it were, it's a very close shop, especially in the UK. In fact, 2 days ago, a colleague rang me and asked me exactly the same questions, and I was unable to give her an answer, not because I didn't want to. You know me, I will share information. I simply could not give her an answer. And I know Ken is struggling because, yeah.
Is it because perhaps those agencies that deal with the assignments don't actually advertise? They don't they don't make known who they are, and that's part of the way that they keep things pretty closed. That's the impression that I've had in the past, Sue, if that helps answer. I've tried as well to do research on agencies who deal with nuclear facilities translation, interpreting, but I got nowhere and gave up. I'm
It
afraid
just
to say.
seems to be a very, I mean, maybe a closed shop.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how colleagues in the room and online who are interested in this kind of work, how do we get into it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. There are, Robin is right, there are sometimes issues of kind of confidentiality and anonymity, but there are also very large amounts of work, and there are large numbers of companies, particularly in France, working in this area. I'm trying to think. It's a difficult question to answer for those reasons, yeah. There are issues of anonymity, confidentiality, and there are issues of just the sheer scale of the market.
I mean, I'm not asking you to breach confidentiality, obviously.
No, I understand, Sue, yeah.
Have a think.
I will have a think.
And we'll come back to that question. We won't forget about your question, Sue. Thank you.
Okay, because it's obviously an interesting area and an area that some of us would be very keen to get into. And you've told us about what you do, but we don't know how to get into it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, Sue. I shall have a think.
Thank you.
Charity, you had a question? Please unmute yourself. Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Information on nuclear.
So let's hear from Charity and then, yeah, no problem. Thank you, Charity.
Thank you very much. My question goes to Ken. When he was speaking, he made mention of toolbox translators. So can you explain more to us what he meant by toolbox translators? Secondly, is it a box, or what are the contents of toolbox translators? Thank you.
Thank you, Charity. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so what I mean by toolboxes is, I don't mean a physical toolbox. I mean a set of tools that you can use as a translator, or in this case, as an interpreter, when you are faced with a problem. So if I'm interpreting in a business environment or in a technical environment where I'm on site, and I don't know a term, I need to have a series of boxes that I can check in my head to say, okay, have I tried this? Have I tried a similar term if I think it sounds like a term I already know? Have I asked the client? Have I asked the client working in the other language? I'm usually working between French and English, so have I asked the English language client? Have I asked the French language client? Have I asked for an explanation? And all of these things are happening when you're on your feet, when you're actually doing the job. So that would be the toolbox for terminology. And as I said before, then you'd have a set of tools for understanding the technology, what you need to do if you don't understand technology. You'd have a set of tools if you are faced with a situation where, for example, the clients start to have an argument, start to have a disagreement, then you would have a toolbox to go, okay, I need to either step back, or I need to intervene, or I need to step out of interpreter mode, and I need to suggest that we take a different approach, or suggest that we have a break, or suggest that we have a coffee or whatever. So those are the kind of things I'm talking about when I say toolboxes. And what I have found, and what I have found with talking to translators and talking to students, is that it's very helpful to think, I find it helpful, and I know that other people I've talked to find it helpful to think in terms of toolboxes, to think, what are my options here in this difficulty or in this situation?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Charity. Mr. Salim, if you just bear with us a few seconds, I know you've been waiting. Valentina in the room here wanted to suggest something. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry that I intervened. Yeah, right. What is that? How do I use it? Oh, yeah, sorry about this. Yeah, okay. Now, coming back to Sue's question about the source of information for interpreters, translators in nuclear industry. In the past, there used to be, I mean, one of the source which interpreters, translators mainly used was going through specialized journals. For example, specialized journals, say like mining, oil drilling and mining. They would go through, and at the end there would be adverts for where companies would specify which language translators they want, and quite often the translators were working in the house or for a certain seasonal work. For example, there were a number of adverts in a School of Technical Mud in Truro, where they were did this, but I don't know whether this is a contemporary way of getting jobs.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Salim, your question. Thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to find out regarding conference interpreting. Are there any training sessions for this?
Any sessions for what? Sorry, Mr. Salim?
Training sessions for conference interpreting.
For conference
interpreting. Yes, I do attend courts, police, home office.
Yes.
So I was just exploring whether before jumping into this conference interpreting, I would rather prefer to have some sort of training.
Yes.
So I was wondering if there is any such
I
training
don't know,
sessions.
Mr. Salim, I don't know if you're based in the London area or where you're based, but certainly there is the
London.
Well, then on your doorstep there are at least two: Thames Valley and
Could you kindly give me the name?
just a metropolitan. I think the London Metropolitan University. So those two are in the London area. One is in near Borough. It's the Metropolitan University. I think it's London Met. And if you want, you can either contact me. You have my email address, or contact Emmanuel, and I can give the information that way. But the other one in the London area is Thames Valley University for conference interpreting. They do masters.
Sorry, I would suggest University of Surrey in Guildford also.
Yeah. But do they do conference interpreting, Robin?
I don't know, but they have a very good Centre for Translation and Interpreting Studies.
Yeah. Thank you. Robin, would you like to comment on any of the questions that were asked by Mr. Salim and by Charity? I mean, she asked Ken about Charity, asking specifically about the toolbox, but
the question by Charity about Toolbox relates, for me, relates more to translation, and we're not really here to focus on translation, but it's the same sort of thing. I have a toolbox of skills, and it's not that I arrive at an assignment and I empty my toolbox on my workstation and get out all of the tools. It's just I know what tools are in the toolbox, whether it's translation or interpreting, and I will pick out each one as I need it. So, for example, to come back to the topic of vicarious trauma, if I can sense that the questioning from the immigration officer is starting to going towards personal abuse or violence or distress and topics of that nature, then I'm almost sort of steeling myself and preparing myself to just interpret, and that's it.
Thank you, Robin. Boyko Ignatov, I think, is the next person. But I think, Mr. Salim, was your question sort of answered, more or less?
Yes.
Boyko.
Yeah, I was waiting because I thought the gentleman. Okay, my question is very simple. How long time we have before we are replaced by artificial intelligence?
I'd like to answer that because that came up this afternoon in one of the translator forums that I belong to. And the very simple answer is, as long as you're specialized in what you're doing, there's no way that a computer or a machine is going to take your job. And that came up in specifically to a website for a business, a translation business, which offers to translate, get this, hold on, let me just see, 30,000 words a minute. 30,000 words a minute. Okay, that's complete rubbish. If you think back to the early 1950s or the post Second World War period, when machine translation really started to take off, the promises were then that humans would be no longer needed. And it's just not true. The nature of the work that humans can do in terms of specialization is far, far superior to what a computer can do. And you've got to remember as well that AI is only as intelligent as the people who are giving it the rules and the information to work by. So yeah, there are sectors of both interpreting and translation which perhaps arguably have been taken already by machine translation. I'm not going to say AI, but by machine translation. But what that does is that it puts more emphasis on those higher sectors of the market, so-called premium sector, where your specialism as a human being is really valued by the clients. And one final thing to say on that is that in terms of interpreting, I'm no expert at all in machine interpreting. It does exist. It is impressive. And the people who are most impressed are the people who are on holiday with their smartphone saying, oh, look, I can order a pint of beer in Swahili or whatever. So what? That's not really that useful.
Thank you, Robin. I'll let Ken answer that
Yeah,
question as well for Boyko.
Thank you for the question, and thanks, Robin. My own feeling is that we are going to have to stop. We are going to have to be cooperating with the technology. I don't think it will replace us very quickly, but I think it will. We will have to work with it in the same way that we are doing as translators, that we're working with translation memory. In my own area, working on site in industrial facilities and nuclear facilities in particular, I had a conversation recently with somebody who, a firm that was offering technology which allows people to carry a handheld device on which a remote interpreter can work while they're walking around a factory. So a kind of, not quite augmented reality, but a kind of a tablet with a camera so that the interpreter can see what the client is looking at. And that would obviously mean that the interpreter wouldn't get a radiation dose or wouldn't be exposed to saturation and so on. So, however, the interpreter is still working, they're just remote. So I think that the use of these kind of this AI, if you like, I think we will have to work with it. I think we are going down a route where our expertise, as Robin said, our specialist expertise is still valued and still essential and still important, but we have to adapt. If we think that in the same way that we did with translation memory, we're going to have to adapt.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are now basically out of time. I was given a bit of a time check. I would like to thank Emmanuel for organizing and hosting this today, and all of you for attending from wherever you're sitting, and especially to Robin and Ken for their absolutely invaluable insights. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, before I let you go, I'd like to emphasize that I've put in the chat a couple of things that might be of interest. First of all, there is a link to a feedback on this session. It's always very useful to us to know how useful or not so useful the session has been, so that we can adapt future sessions so that it answers your need. This is also an opportunity to ask us to cover some topics. We cannot always answer straight away, but for example, next month we will have a session with Yvonne about ethical dilemmas in public service interpreting, which is something that was requested through the survey. So please seize that opportunity. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. If you're online, sorry, we've got nice catering outside. We cannot send you any, but next month you can come and enjoy it with us. And hope to see many of you next month. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. I just had a
Thank you. Bye.
I had a question relating to colleges or universities in London area. What to do to interpreters? I mean, most of the session is just I missed out because of the network connection problem.
What I don't know if any of the hosts
So
are
I don't know
able.
what's happening. I mean, it's been missed out, the question. I am interested, you know, in starting the career as a police and court interpreter, but I need some sort of, you know, information about it.
Okay, we will get back to you online because we have to go now for the next part of the session. So I'll be in touch.
If you send Emmanuel an email, she will reply.
I've got it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.